Welcome to Leverage. This is episode 9. I am here with Ben Gaum. And it has taken me 8 outtakes to get his company right, only because now I'm having a brain freeze. He is principal architect of Project Studio Architects. Oh, I'm so glad I got that right. Yay.
Yay.
That's a great thing about having a podcast like 4 people watch, that I can just do that. I am super excited to have him on because we are going to be talking about Laneway Suites specifically. We'll get into Garden Suites, the 2.0 of Laneway Suites, but I've been pretty obsessed with them for the last few years. I really believe that they are the future of Toronto's landscape, and with all the changes in the density happening, perfect time for us to have you on. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks
I'm for
excited.
doing the podcast.
Thank
and
you.
for giving me a little reprieve on your
On my
name.
last
And
name.
I even spelled his name wrong when I tagged him in a post. I was lucky enough to see his amazing Laneway Suite that he created. And so welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited.
Yeah. I am excited about this whole trend. And I
Yes.
think that there are so many people, including me, I really don't think that I understand all of it yet, for someone that really is interested in it. But the more and more I talk to clients about it, the more they're kind of like, yeah, like I heard about it. Talk to me about this. So, I mean, just for anybody who doesn't understand what a laneway suite is, obviously it's on a lot that has a laneway behind it. So you don't have a neighbor behind you. Your lot line ends at a laneway, of which either can be a garage, could just be parking, or you can build its own entity. So a laneway suite has its own plumbing, it has its own electrical, it has its own kitchen, and again, it can be 2-story depending on, and I guess we'll get into that. I don't know what the bylaws are, but it can be a garage below. You can have a rental unit above. There's all sorts of things, but. Yeah. What am I missing? Like, what else do we need to know about like a laneway suite by definition? You also can't break it off. So I can't have a lot in which I build a laneway suite and go, you know what, I'm just going to sell that.
Right. I think that's the first one, because when it first came in, first of all, I am just as obsessed, obviously, and excited about laneway houses at you, so much that
we're going to geek out here, people.
I geeked out for the last 4+ years, putting mine and my whole initiative together, and then building mine in a completely unique way, which I'm sure we will get into soon.
We will.
But yeah, so basically, I think the first thing that people automatically assumed was, wow, this is great. I can sort of technically sever the lot and I build a little mini house and then I can sell that off. And it's like, so first thing you need to know is it is a total appendage of your house. Not
for
only,
now, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, almost literally physically, because you can't run separate services to it. All the services have to come from your house. So you have to run your electrical from your house to the laneway house. Your plumbing, your water, your gas, everything has to run from your house through all your services out to the laneway house.
Okay.
Yeah. So
So it's not a separate account with hydro. Like all of a sudden it's just like you're at 123 Sesame Street. 123 Sesame Street has one hydro bill.
Yeah.
Or can you sever it?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, like with any property, right? You could have a property, you could have a property that has a couple different units in it. Right. You can meter it separately, but you're metering the main source, right? Okay. So you can still separately meter your water and your hydro and your electrical and even your bowel line, or you can meter stuff separately, but the main intake source from the guts of it all is coming from your house, feeding back to the laneway house. Yeah.
So what I get really excited about when talking about laneway suites is just so on a couple levels. So first of all is affordability. Like we went from like our generation of like really just having like a basement apartment, right? That was the best you were going to get for any kind of extra income, or multi-generational. Right? A lot of people bring their elderly parents to live in the basement. But it also is this, there's all these unique ways that people are now looking at it. Like maybe I build a laneway suite and I live in it as my retirement because I'm going to maybe live, I know this sounds very, like there's a very small amount of people in this world that can afford to do this, but all of a sudden you want to spend your winters in Florida. You don't need a whole house, but you want a place. Yeah. So you're going to live there or rent it out, and you rent out the main house, and all of a sudden now you've got an income.
But listen, I think what you just said almost proves that you don't have to have a lot of money to do that. Because if I could live in a beautiful laneway house as sort of a retiree or whatever it is, if I'm renting out the whole main part of my house, that will afford me to, presumably people at that stage of their lives have either almost finished with their mortgages or paid off their mortgages, which means the money that I'm going to get from the income of the main house will totally allow me to go spend 6 months down in whatever.
Right.
It's going to just continue to pay for itself and for me to live down in Florida. And then when I come back in the summertime, I live in the laneway house. And I agree. It's like, it seems like every day I'm getting introduced or talked to about like with a new idea or a new innovative way that people
use them,
right? And this was even before COVID. It seemed like everything was lined up, and then COVID also introduced the whole, well, now everybody's basically going to either work from home or work from home 3 days a week. And again, we'll get into that, which is inevitably what, I started my laneway house with the total intention of taking the tenant in my basement, which we were the typical case of the majority of the people I think out there are, even when we bought our house back in the days when it was, ridiculously affordable compared to now. But now, even nowadays, it's like, who can afford even a starter home without the prospect of saying we need to have a tenant in the basement while we live in the house, and that helps with the income and the whole thing. So,
and by the way, now homes with basement apartments are going for more because there's the ability to be able to afford, and there's more demand for it.
Absolutely.
I completely agree.
Yeah, but now you also have the advent of this. Again, those people who are working from home, and which is what I decided to do. And that initially was to move a tenant into the laneway house, get him out of the basement. But then I realized, man, I'm paying
I'm paying
a crazy amount of money for my office, which is basically 400 square feet anyways.
Right.
And I could build a laneway house, and I can pay myself more than what a tenant would pay me and less than what my rent is. So, a lot of people have completely moved into the prospect of living from home or working from home. But it's like, imagine working from home in like a completely separate building, right? So you don't.
Well, I think that's also, my neighbors also did that in a shipping container. So we'll talk, but I think the reality is that people needed that separate space. They couldn't just, if they had to, obviously they had an extra office. I mean, I was selling homes to people who were never planning to have children, and they needed a 3-bedroom home because they needed two home offices. But some people were like, I need to separate that house from.
I need to actually like put pants on and leave the house in order to. If I don't put pants on, like no work is getting done. So even
that's
that
going to be a short.
Even with it being 50 feet away from my house, it's like I have to put pants on to go there. So
I feel a little bit more like mindset of work. But so we talk about Laneway Suite, and then all of a sudden there was proposal. It came from John Tory, the City of Toronto. There was also talk like forward, like on an Ontario level, so maybe you can give us some insight into this, about an increased density. So there's something on the table in front of City Council that would allow every single house, it would be a bylaw, to have 3 separate living dwellings. I didn't say that properly, but basically imagine this. So you have your main house as one, you have your basement apartment as a second one, and then you have a potential of either a laneway suite in the back or you have a garden suite. And a garden suite is a third dwelling or another dwelling in your backyard where you do not have a laneway behind. You have a neighbor. So this is not passed.
This hasn't passed yet, but it's like, I mean, it's almost likely going to pass formally very soon. It's sort of an inevitability that, like, the city is struggling with a housing crisis, and it's struggling with a rental crisis, and it's so this is their move. Is it the right move? I don't know. I have some reservations, but I get it. I understand it, and I'm definitely pro progress and development, but I think a lot of these moves are also done so quickly with zero sort of foresight to really understand how it would impact things in the future. This might be that, but
including in that is, and we won't delve too far into this, but included in that proposal is to allow rooming houses to be legal, correct? So it's a controversial issue we for sure won't necessarily delve too deep in, but we did talk about the fact that Laneway Suites, laneways tend to be much more prevalent in the downtown core, East End, West End, where, you already have that density. You're already kind of on top of each other. There, you're not looking at the 45, the 60 wide lots. Right. And you are a little bit more accustomed to having, a bus route right next to you or be very close to massive density. So now the question is, are they going to start putting garden suites in Leaside or in Bedford Park or, and I think that that's where it comes, is that if it is, you mentioned, if it's a bylaw, anybody listening who's ever had someone do something that was out of the ordinary, you'll hear that they would have had to go to committee of adjustments, which is where if in that area you were only allowed to go this high with your house, and a lot of now people are building up or building down, that became a big thing, that you had to go to committee of adjustments and they would send a letter out in your neighborhood. Right. And if people put up a fuss, you actually couldn't build. Right.
It basically came down to before the Laneway House bylaw was a formal bylaw, it was nothing other than a request, right? So, it was just you actually in the original bylaw, it said your auxiliary building couldn't have residential, you couldn't have any residents living in an auxiliary building. It couldn't be more than one story. There was all these things that, but the Laneway House and Garden Suite bylaw allowed it to be written into the bylaw, which means if you design something as of right, there's nothing your neighbors can say anymore, right? Whereas before it was anything you were doing outside of the the variances of the bylaw, you'd have to go to committee of adjustment and ask for permission, which opened the door to every neighbor to have their opinion on your project, which is mostly a contentious thing if they're showing up to sort of ask the question. So. But this has allowed it to be, this is now bylaw, right? So this is now, if you're designing.
It's looking like it's going to pass.
That bill for the 3 units per residential property, looks like it's going to pass, which we'll see. There's going to be a lot more uproar about that than the Laneway House bylaw was very well received. Yeah. And I think it's to your point, right? Basically anything north of Eglinton, laneways really don't even exist, right? So anything north of Eglinton, anything south of Eglinton sort of lends itself to it's just more of an urban context. It's a more urban dynamic.
Very true.
Right? So it's always, the annex and all these areas, and Cabbage and all these tightly knit areres were already filled with apartments and multi-res buildings and the whole thing. So it was simple. When the Laneway bylaw was first developed, it actually didn't entirely have everything to do with increasing density and housing crisis and the whole thing. A lot of it had to do with we want to try to activate these laneways. We drive through. There's so many kilometers of worth of laneway in the city. They're all graffiti ridden and garbage, and just to clean them up. That was a major push of the original Laneway House initiative. Was to beautify and activate these laneways that were just. They were becoming more sort of
they are their own street.
For garbage and crime and this and that and blah, blah, blah. And they're not well lit to begin with, and they're sort of dangerous. And people are using them, but they're not super safe. They're not activated. They're not inviting. So that was definitely part of it. It definitely, evolved into more of a need for more housing, new housing typology and all things. So, yeah.
So, for everybody who, if you're like me and just I'm so jealous. I wish I could build a Laneway suite. I can't. I don't have a laneway, and I wish that I could do a garden suite. Oh my God, I have neighbors that would hate me, but I don't have the right lot. So let's talk about the bylaws for the Laneway suite, so the interesting thing is, other than having access to a laneway, what else do we need to know if you have a Laneway suite out there?
There's a bunch of things. Obviously, it's a whole bylaw that was written, but basically your lot has to be big enough, because one of the major elements is the distance from your house to the laneway itself, right?
Which is 40 feet.
It's 5.5 meters it's either 5.5 at 5.5 meters. Your laneway house then has to have a 45 angular plane on the second floor to allow for, proper shadow and privacy and the whole thing from your neighbors. If you're 7 or 7.5 meters away from your house, you sort of have clear reign to
do what you want.
Do what you want. Yeah. And the laneway houses are, just like as a garage that's on a laneway, they're allowed to go 0 lot line, so from lot line to lot line. Whereas a garden suite has a setback regulation for the side yard setbacks as well as a rear yard setback. And then probably the last sort of big one is for a laneway house. For a laneway suite, you need to be 45 meters. So if you're in like if you're in the middle of a very, very long laneway, you have to be 45 meters from either like the next laneway or a street, or you have to be 45 meters away from where fire trucks can get to service that laneway. Okay. All right. So those are sort of the three major elements that are first looked at in terms of, can we do this on our lot? So
and I understand from a garden suite, you also have to have a certain amount of space to be able to get like access through, like, what are those parameters? So I need to be able to access the garden suite. I'm a tenant or whatever in the garden suite. Yeah. I need to get through the side of the house to access it. What are the bylaws with that as well?
Yeah, typically it's like for the garden suite, again, it's all life safety and fire access. So typically you would have, but that's why in the garden suites, they automatically ask for that side yard setback. Okay. But you have to have sort of a 3 foot that's not bad area where you can walk through to access. And even in the laneway suites, if you're not 45 meters away, if you have, if you have this like 3 foot space that allows them to access onto your site, as opposed to going lot line to lot line, it allows them to get in and get onto your property and do fire suppression and stuff like that.
So I mean, considering like how amazing I think it is, we talked about the city being really great about allowing it. Yeah, they have actually not been the issue at all.
No,
but the issue is the cost to build.
The cost, yeah. So I mean, I think people generally know this, but maybe they don't. But the laneway suite initiative is really underperforming.
Which is shocking.
I won't say drastically, but it's underperforming by a lot in terms of what they thought. As soon as they introduced this bylaw, they thought it would just explode, and by now we'd have literally thousands in the pipeline, and thousands being built in the whole thing, and it's not the case. And I mean, I can tell you from my experience that my interpretation of why that is because even before my initiative, I went out. Luckily, I'm an architect, so I just did my own design and had to go get it priced out, and the prices I was getting back were like insane. It was like, starting at $500,000, $550,000, even $600,000. We're talking for a 20 by 20 foot space, and mine is a garage at ground floor and a living space above. Right. I'm like, did you just say $500,000 or $550,000? That's insane. So I think the city totally knocked it out of the park. For something to get passed
unusual to
hear, so quickly in Toronto. I mean, look, we all grew up in Toronto. It typically takes 20 years to turn a parking lot into a park. Like that takes, so for the city to push through a laneway house initiative and a garden suite initiative so quickly to solve an immediate problem so quickly and give the resolution there on paper, and yet, and then, the cost of these things just out of the gate were exorbitant, extraordinary.
And we talked about that. It wasn't so much, I mean, yes, cost of goods has gone up, but it was truly about the labor. And not to throw anybody under the bus, but the reality is that, and if anyone has done renovations, this is just the way it works. Like, the smaller the project, the more premium you pay on it, because it has to be worth that person's time, right?
Yeah. I mean, anybody who's, I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, but, Jiffy, the Jiffy app and stuff like that. I mean, they put a great app together to get to be able to, like, how before Jiffy came along, there was like, how do I get a guy to just come fish my dishwasher and it's not going to cost $5,000
just to walk through the door?
Just come on, I just need a small job. The small jobs were getting harder and harder as building and construction in Toronto got more and more and crazier. It got harder and harder for anybody who wanted to do a small job. And the reality is, and again, I'm not poo-pooing any contractors out there or whatever. I'm just talking about my experience. And my experience was, you know, in traditional wood frame construction, if it's going to take you 10 to 12 months to build a 500 square foot laneway house versus 10 to 12 months to build a 3,500 square foot, $2 million home, why would a contractor, most of the contractors are like, why would I do that for 10 months and not build that home for 10 months?
No, we all need to make a living, for sure.
I'm going to make it worth my while, and this is the cost for me to do that, right? Because it's not a regulated field, and they can charge whatever they want, and contractors are in massive high demand right now. They have been for the last 15 years, right? So that's what, in my experience, I found was the tricky part. And that's where I had to completely turn everything on its head and rethink, how can I develop an initiative that basically eliminates as much of the labor as possible. I started looking into sort of prefab, but I've done enough prefab jobs with my architecture firm to know that, like, not only does it never really come in cheaper, it typically comes in at more expensive.
I was going to say it doesn't.
More time consuming. And it's way more. You have to be dead on from the get go, because if everything gets built and you bring it to site and someone's off by 1 inch or 2 inches, you're fucked. So I needed to, again, my whole philosophy. I said my whole philosophy in life is, in an architecture is to be as centrist as possible. So I took a centrist approach by saying, I like the prefabricated elements of a shipping container, but it still gives me the flexibility to build how I want to do it and adapt to anything that can sort of happen on site. Like if we are off by 1 inch or 2, we literally just move the shipping container over by inch or 2 and so it would be adaptable like that. But I mean, we developed this, our Laneway House initiative using shipping containers, and so far it's coming in at like 30% less. It's probably even more. I mean, 30% less of what, right? 30% less of all of the comparables that I went out there and compared against in terms of built laneway houses. But when you compare it to all of the prices that I got back, it's even more, right? But I feel safe saying 30% as of right now. But I think the bigger factor is time. I mean, we're able to build these things in 4 months as opposed to a year, and that just that allows people to get a tenant in, get someone in, get income going, and whatever. Yeah. And just building anything is just not fun, right? Like it's massive stress induced. Chaos for everything. Even the ones that go well are stress inducing, right? So, very true. So if you could do this in 4 months, be in, be out in 4 months, it's
from start to finish, including permits.
From start to finish of construction, right? So, but really the permitting, the beauty of my initiative is also the fact that, like, there's a lot of architects out there designing beautiful stuff, like really, really beautiful laneway houses. And
they're spectacular.
They're just spectacular. Yeah. And unfortunately, maybe I shouldn't say unfortunately, but I look at those and first of all, they're all being built for $750,000 on average.
Oh, easily.
And they're very one-off. So the design process can take up to 6 months, right? So it's almost like building a little mini house.
Oh, they are.
Where I wanted to take the IKEA approach where it's like, man, you walk down that aisle, it's like you've got 4 choices. Like, how many different ways can we design a 20 by 20 foot box, right? It's just like, and keep the cost down.
I think that's the really important part, right?
It's like, well, people just want to, they're not building look, there are people who are building these beautiful one-off man caves or like a beautiful, apartment for their parents to move in or whatever. And it's like, okay, that you want to take your time on and build and do it almost like a little mini custom home. Yeah. Right? But for the majority of people out there, I'm like, I just need a really nice, clean looking product that it's like, how quickly can we get the permits? I'm like, the design's basically already done, right? Like we have like we've got a whole bunch of designs already. And again, they're all just based on just the different ways you can design a 20 by 20 foot box, essentially. So put it on your site plan, go, and we get the permits hopefully quickly in a month. And
right.
Then we start
that's fast.
Right. So, I mean, the only thing that screwed everything up was COVID also introduced this massive delay in product delivery. And one of the big ones is, I mean, again, we don't have to deal with delays in product delivery for wood and like all this stuff. It's just already there. So the good thing is that shipping containers really never got affected like that. Like I could get shipping containers tomorrow and have them on our lot, start working on them tomorrow, right?
Wow.
The big thing is the windows. Windows still take about 3 months
custom ones,
yeah. Not even custom. I mean, unless you're going to Home Depot and buying off the shelf.
That's what
right?
I mean.
So,
sorry. Yeah, other than that.
But really every window manufacturer out there is, 12, 14, 16 weeks and whatever. So that we're hoping will come down. But again, we've got it all down to a timing sequence whereas like it almost doesn't really matter. We can go in there and start finishing the interior and doing what we need to do because all the framing's there. It's all it's like we put the boxes on, we're welding them together, we're doing all this stuff. And then if like at month 3 the windows come in, they come in, boom, they bring them in, and we typically use Tiltco, which is a very like it's not a low end vinyl crank window. It's a high-end window wall, aluminum, and that's why we're able to get like our entire facade is total glass-filled facade. It's like there's no little punch crank windows.
We will definitely put the link into the build for sure for anybody in my link tree or in YouTube. For sure they'll take a look at it. I think by the way, it's why we're not seeing these builds happen. We've talked about this. Like there's that company that watches all of the permits that go into the city for all the Laneway Suites. And every single one of them is this magnificent, huge, not even mini house sometimes, like a house on its own. And you're not seeing these really efficient, affordable, second, income generating kind of suites because no one can make the numbers work. And we talked about, like, I saw your spate. It's phenomenal. And I mean, I think, no, truly, like between the Murphy bed and then you put it back up and then you can have you could have a party for, 4 or 6 people there. Great size bathroom, great kitchen. Full kitchen, and then looking at what you could rent that for. Like no one's doing it because if you're paying full price for the build, it just doesn't. You can't make it work.
The numbers don't work, right? So again, like for the last 2, maybe 3 years. Yeah, let's call it 3 years, but let's call it 2 years where. I've seen every single article that's come out about, in the Globe and Mail and like every article that's been posted either in print, online, and it showcases, this new typology in Laneway House and whatever. And it's always this ridiculously beautiful.
It's like a 3-bedroom house.
It's a beautiful space
it's gorgeous.
And the whole thing. And not one, I don't think I've ever read one that mentioned anything about cost. Nothing about cost. And it's
never.
Like, that's the number one thing. Like people aren't looking to build their custom forever home where they, what I mean? It's like, this is all about cost. This is all about, and the majority of the people who are looking into this, it's all about cost because they need this income. So, to not even address that at all. And, and then that's why, listen, my next door neighbor, he actually went and had a very good architect. I love her. She designed a great Laneway house. Again, it was more of like this one-off build type stuff. It actually wasn't that crazy. It was a very sort of
similar size.
It was very, very similar, right? But they had already paid for the architectural fees. They got the permits, blah blah blah. They got the permits. They had the permits in hand, and then started going out and shopping around. And it was coming in at like crazy numbers. Yeah. And at the end of the day, they canceled, right? So they spent, 30 or 40 grand on architectural plans, and they built a garage because they couldn't afford it. They couldn't afford to pay for it. So it's unfortunate, right? Because if people sort of had a better idea of what it cost beforehand.
Or if they knew, like if you're looking at, a home with a laneway in the back and I think about it, the East End, like I have clients who own a semi with 2-car parking. Right. like in Riverdale. Like that's gold. Yeah. And you think if you can resell that house with an income property above and a garage below, like what kind of value you've put on top of it. Now, the numbers don't work if you're paying $500,000-$600,000 because then you're not going to get that money back.
I sort of went off on a tangent, but to go back to that, if you're paying, if you're paying $750,000 or even $550,000, it's like to be getting $2,200 a month or even $2,500 a month for that. It's like, do those numbers?
So do the numbers work? And then the other thing for me is also, the investment. It's like saying, are you going to get dollar for dollar for that when you go and sell it? Like that house all of a sudden doesn't go from 1.2 to 1.7. It just doesn't.
Well, I think I actually just read another article where someone was sort of saying, actually someone commented on the Laneway. I'm on a Toronto Laneway Suites Facebook page.
Right.
And this woman was like, Laneway Suites are stupid because the much better investment is.
She must be on my YouTube comments last week.
Well, no, but she actually it's actually sort of made sense. She was like, it's stupid. I'd rather go buy a condo I could buy a condo in London for that money.
London, Ontario.
London, Ontario.
Okay, but then you live in London, Ontario.
I know, but her point was almost when you get to like 556
not that there's anything where I went
and
to
700,000, then you get into like, well, I think you could get a 400 square foot condo for about 700,000 or 600,000. I mean, this is more your right.
Depends where you're looking.
Depends where you're looking, right? But even if that isn't the case, it's even more of an argument to say, where else are you going to be able to spend 350, which is what my one story unit initiative is coming. It will hopefully come in and around. I don't want to lock numbers in because
you said it out loud here, people.
Because post COVID. You can't log any, but we're generally looking at that range. And then the 2-story unit would generally come in at about 400. But like, you can't get anything out there for 400. And I've never seen, I've seen other Laneway houses that were built for 400, and it's not even, like, with all due respect, it's not comparable, right? Like you're getting, low end windows, low end cladding material, low end. Everything's just like at the base.
No, for sure. And then, I think going back to, our parents' generation where they had a house, they sold it, and they downsized to a condo. Yeah. That's not a thing anymore because condos are so expensive.
It was only a thing when our parents were doing it.
Right. But then you also had maintenance fees. Yeah. So... anyway, I still really want one, but I can't.
We'll get
we can't. And so if anyone is looking to contact you, reach out, find out more, where can they reach you?
They can reach me at, my email is ben@ps-a.ca. Nice and
we'll put it all into the
phone number 647-504-5565. And ps-a.ca is the website for Project Studio Architects. So we've got all of our projects there. We're typically a boutique architecture firm that does everything from single family, but a lot of low to mid-rise residential. But we also do commercial and retail stuff as well. But we have a whole separate thing on there for my initiative. I've called it Blockhouse, which is sort of the Laneway House initiative. It's sort of I love it. Sort of met with the. They're essentially like big, massive Lego blocks, right?
They're so cool.
There's stuff in other designs that we didn't even do with mine. If you start to push and pull the lane, the shipping containers, it opens tons of opportunity just by single moves, right? Like you go like that, it gives you like a really nice balcony there and a balcony on the other side, and the balcony on one side becomes an overhang for an entry on the other side.
And it's just from shifting.
There's tons of stuff just by doing simple shift moves. With the containers. So, I know shipping containers is by no means a new thing. And the first thing we typically get is a lot of people say, well, yeah, I've seen that on like tiny home shows on A&E, and I've seen it on Instagram, whatever. And yeah, but there's a reason it's never ever been sort of introduced in an urban context, because it doesn't really lend itself to sort of building a home in the city, right? Yeah. But when the Laneway House initiative came along, we're talking like these laneways that are sort of, I don't want to say gritty. We're trying to ungritty them.
Some of them
but
were.
Some of them are, but But the shipping container just lends itself to the aesthetic of more of a sort of industrial, even though it's not industrial, it's more of a sort of industrialized commercial, a contemporary
it's the future.
Look. But just the size of them worked perfectly, right? Because most of the laneway homes had garages, and most of the garages are 20 feet deep, which is a shipping container.
Right.
And then most of the lots that are on laneways in the city are typically between 16 and 20 feet wide, which is 2 shipping containers side by side. Perfect. So it just lent itself to, it's like the Laneway House Initiative was almost designed for shipping containers, right? So,
and there are a lot of them out there.
There's a ton out there. Yeah, so.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for coming to visit us right after being at the Home Show.
Ooh, exciting!
Yes, yeah. we had a personality in our midst. Anyway, thank you so much. I will have you back.
Thank you for my Yeti mug.
Yeah, for sure. Plug the Yeti mug. All right, thank you.
Thanks.